The story of the Nephilim is one of the most fascinating mysteries ever recorded in ancient texts. With only a handful of references in Scripture, their presence has stirred centuries of debate and speculation. Who were these beings, spoken of in whispers of both awe and fear? Were they giants who walked the earth in unimaginable size? Were they fallen ones born of rebellion? Or were they something else entirely, a mystery that still lingers beyond human understanding? The power of this question lies not only in curiosity, but in what it reveals about humanity itself. The Nephilim stand at a crossroads where heaven and earth seem to meet, where the boundaries between the divine and the human are crossed. Their story is both strange and compelling, inviting us to explore the deepest questions of creation, corruption, and destiny. For centuries, theologians and historians have searched for answers. Some found connections to angelic beings, others to human rulers, and others still to symbolic figures of corruption and tyranny. What makes the Nephilim so captivating is that no single explanation can contain them. Their story remains open, a puzzle that challenges us to look closer and think deeper. When we hear the word Nephilim, it carries with it the weight of the unknown. The very mention of their name evokes images of a world before the flood, a time when the earth was filled with violence and the boundaries of creation were blurred. It is a name that has traveled across cultures, sparking myths, legends, and theories that continue to echo today. The Nephilim are not only figures of ancient times, they are symbols of the questions that every generation asks about power, about rebellion, and about the struggle between what is holy and what is corrupted. Their story reminds us that the world is not only shaped by what we can see, but also by mysteries that remain hidden, waiting to be uncovered. If you enjoy exploring these kinds of mysteries and uncovering the hidden layers of ancient scripture and history, make sure to subscribe to this channel, give this video a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. When the name Nephilim first appears in Scripture, it does so without explanation, almost as though the reader is expected to already know who they are. In Genesis 6, just before the account of the Great Flood, the text states that the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men of old, men of renown. In only a few lines, the Bible introduces one of the most enduring mysteries of the ancient world, a mystery that has left countless readers with more questions than answers. The word itself, Nephilim, has been the subject of endless debate. Some scholars suggest it comes from a Hebrew root meaning to fall, which has led to the translation fallen ones. Others argue that it may refer to those who cause others to fall, pointing to the destructive power attributed to them. Still others connect the word to ideas of being cast down, hinting at a link with rebellion against heaven. Because the term is rare, appearing only twice in the entire Old Testament, much of its meaning must be drawn from context and tradition rather than direct definition. In Numbers 13, the Nephilim appear again, when the spies sent by Moses into the land of Canaan return with their report. They describe seeing giants, the descendants of Anak, and compare themselves to grasshoppers in their presence. This second mention only deepens the mystery, for it suggests that beings connected to the Nephilim survived or re-emerged after the flood, raising questions about continuity, memory, and the persistence of legend in Israel's history. Different translations over the centuries have shaped how people imagine the Nephilim. The Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, rendered the word as gigantes, or giants, cementing the image of massive, towering figures. Latin translations carried this sense forward, and it became deeply embedded in Western imagination. Yet the Hebrew does not directly mean giant, leaving open the possibility that these beings were defined not by size, but by spiritual origin or moral corruption. This ambiguity has allowed the Nephilim to occupy a unique place where interpretation and imagination meet. They can be seen as literal giants of flesh and bone, as hybrids of heavenly and earthly beings, or as symbols of human wickedness and pride. Each interpretation opens a different window into the ancient world and its struggles to understand the mysteries of creation. The brevity of the biblical references is itself telling. Ancient writers often condensed stories into fragments, expecting their listeners to be familiar with larger traditions that were passed down orally. It is possible that the mention of the Nephilim in Genesis and Numbers was a way of alluding to a much broader set of tales, stories that have since been lost or preserved only in scattered fragments across apocryphal and extra-biblical texts. Over the centuries, rabbis, church fathers, and scholars wrestled with these passages, each trying to reconcile them with broader theology. Were the Nephilim a sign of angelic rebellion or simply an exaggeration of human power and corruption? Were they meant to be understood literally, or were they part of a symbolic language pointing to deeper truths? The diversity of answers only proves how powerful the mystery remains. The questions raised by the Nephilim cannot be separated from the enigmatic phrase that surrounds their story: the union of the sons of God and the daughters of men. To understand the Nephilim, one must first grapple with who these sons of God were, and why their actions gave rise to beings who shook the earth and alarmed humanity. This question leads us into one of the most debated passages in Scripture, a passage that has ignited both wonder and controversy for centuries. The account in Genesis 6 describes a time when the population of the earth was growing and daughters were being born to men. The text then tells us that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. This simple yet provocative statement has been the source of profound debate, for it suggests an interaction between two very different kinds of beings, one divine or angelic, the other human. One interpretation found in some of the earliest Jewish traditions is that the sons of God were angelic beings who left their appointed place and entered into forbidden unions with human women. This reading finds support in the Book of Enoch and other writings that expand on the Genesis account, describing in vivid detail how heavenly beings descended to earth and corrupted humanity. Such a view paints the Nephilim as literal hybrids, the unnatural offspring of two realms that were never meant to intermingle. Yet not all traditions have accepted this interpretation. Some argue that the sons of God were not angels, but the righteous descendants of Seth, the godly line that stood in contrast to the descendants of Cain. According to this view, the passage describes a breakdown in spiritual boundaries, as the holy line of Seth intermarried with those who did not follow God. The result was moral corruption and the rise of powerful men whose fame came not from divine blessing, but from violence and rebellion. Others propose that the phrase "sons of God" referred to rulers or kings who claimed divine authority, a pattern seen in many ancient cultures. These leaders may have taken women by force, amassing harems as a display of power and dominance. If so, the Nephilim could represent the legacy of tyrants whose strength and cruelty left lasting scars on humanity. Each interpretation has implications for how the Nephilim are understood. If they were angelic hybrids, they embody a cosmic rebellion against the order of creation. If they were descendants of Seth, they symbolize humanity's slide into corruption and disobedience. If they were born from tyrannical rulers, they represent the destructive nature of human pride and ambition. In every case, the union of the sons of God and daughters of men serves as a warning about what happens when boundaries are crossed and when power is abused. The mystery deepens when one considers the reaction of God in the passage. Right after describing these unions, the text declares that the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great on the earth. and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. The story then moves swiftly toward the decision to send the flood. The presence of the Nephilim is therefore not an isolated detail, but part of the backdrop to one of the most dramatic judgments in the Bible. The question of who the sons of God were may never be answered with certainty, yet the implications of their actions ripple throughout history and theology. They open the door to reflections on human desire, divine boundaries, and the dangers of corruption. And they prepare the way for the image of the Nephilim as giants, beings whose size and power reflected not only physical might, but also spiritual disturbance. With these interpretations in mind, the story begins to shift from questions of identity to questions of appearance. Were the Nephilim truly giants who towered over ordinary humans, or was their greatness measured in reputation, power, and influence? To understand this, we turn to the traditions that describe them as colossal figures, the mighty ones who filled the earth with their presence. The image of giants has captured human imagination since the dawn of storytelling. From towering figures who stride across the land to warriors whose strength seems beyond human measure, the concept of giants evokes awe and fear. When the Nephilim are described in connection with such imagery, it is no wonder that they became associated with beings of immense size and power. The biblical account in Numbers 13 paints a vivid picture. The spies sent into Canaan returned with a report that they saw the descendants of Enoch, whom they associated with the Nephilim. They confessed that they felt like grasshoppers compared to them, a striking expression of the sheer scale of these figures. Whether this was literal or metaphorical, the effect on the people of Israel was profound, filling them with dread and despair. Other traditions outside the canonical scriptures also describe giants in ways that resonate with the image of the Nephilim. The Book of Enoch speaks of offspring who grew to great size, consuming vast amounts of food and even turning against humanity in violence. Mesopotamian myths tell of figures who blended divine and human qualities, often portrayed as larger than life. The Greek stories of titans, massive beings who warred against the gods, echo similar themes. The idea of giants appears again and again, suggesting that many cultures shared a memory, or at least a fascination, with beings who surpassed normal human limits. Yet not all descriptions of giants should be read as literal accounts of physical stature. In ancient languages, terms like mighty and renowned often referred to reputation and influence rather than body size. A warrior who conquered many lands, or a king who ruled with unmatched power, could be described as a giant in metaphorical terms. The Nephilim may have been understood in this way as larger-than-life figures whose presence dominated the imagination of those around them. Still, the persistence of literal giant traditions cannot be ignored. Archaeological speculation has often fueled the debate, with claims of oversized skeletons and mysterious structures suggesting the work of beings stronger than ordinary humans. While many such claims remain unverified or symbolic, they point to humanity's enduring sense that stories of giants may be rooted in something more than myth. The role of giants in Israel's history is complex. They are presented as obstacles to be overcome, embodiments of fear and opposition. To face giants was to confront not only physical danger, but the deep sense of human inadequacy in the face of overwhelming odds. In this sense, the Nephilim as giants became symbols of the struggles every nation and individual must face, struggles that seem too great to conquer without divine help. Whether literal or symbolic, the giants remind us of the fragile line between fact and myth, between history and memory. They show how ancient peoples grappled with the mystery of extraordinary figures who seem to exceed human limits. And they prepare the way for the story of the Watchers, the heavenly beings whose descent to earth created conditions for the rise of the Nephilim and shaped humanity's understanding of rebellion against heaven. Among the writings that expand on the story of Genesis 6, none has been as influential as the Book of Enoch. This ancient text, though not included in the biblical canon for most traditions, provides a detailed account of the beings known as the Watchers, angels, who were appointed to observe humanity but who chose instead to descend and take part in its corruption. According to Enoch, these angels not only took human wives, but also imparted forbidden knowledge to their offspring and to mankind. The Watchers are described as leaders of rebellion, beings who abandoned their heavenly order and sought their own desires on earth. Their actions created the Nephilim, giants who filled the world with violence, but the corruption did not stop there. The Watchers are said to have taught humanity sorcery, warfare, astrology, and secrets of the heavens and the earth, knowledge that was never meant to be revealed. This knowledge accelerated human sin, deepening the corruption that led to judgment. The story of the Watchers adds another layer to the mystery of the Nephilim. It is no longer only a tale of unusual unions, but also a story of rebellion against divine authority. The Nephilim become the living consequence of choices made by beings who stepped outside the boundaries of their creation. They are a testament to what happens when the sacred is defiled and when knowledge meant for good is twisted into tools of destruction. In the Book of Enoch, the cries of humanity rise up because of the violence brought by the Nephilim, and God sends archangels to bind the Watchers in chains and cast them into the depths until the day of judgment. The Nephilim, meanwhile, are destroyed by the flood, but their spirits are said to remain, wandering as disembodied beings, which some traditions identify with evil spirits or demons that continue to trouble humanity. This narrative connects the Nephilim directly with the larger drama of spiritual warfare. They are not merely ancient figures of legend, but part of a cosmic struggle that stretches across time. The fall of the Watchers mirrors the fall of Satan and his angels, reflecting the theme of rebellion that recurs throughout Scripture. The Nephilim, as their offspring, become part of this ongoing battle between heaven and earth, good and evil. The Watcher's story also offers a profound commentary on the misuse of knowledge. In ancient times, wisdom was seen as a gift from God, a means to guide and protect life. But when knowledge is pursued without reverence, it becomes dangerous. The forbidden teachings of the Watchers remind us that power without moral foundation leads to destruction. The Nephilim, as products of that corrupted knowledge, embody the chaos that follows when divine order is rejected. The story of the Watchers influenced Jewish and Christian thought for centuries, shaping ideas about angels, demons, and the origin of evil. While not universally accepted as scripture, the Book of Enoch and related writings filled in gaps left by Genesis, providing a narrative that explained the presence of giants, the origins of corruption, and the connection between heavenly rebellion and earthly suffering. From here, the mystery of the Nephilim begins to expand beyond the boundaries of Israel's story, echoing across cultures and civilizations. Legends of divine beings, giants, and hybrid offspring appear in mythologies from Greece to Mesopotamia to the Americas. Whether these echoes point to a shared memory of real events or to humanity's common struggle to understand its place in creation, the resonance cannot be ignored. It is in these echoes that we see how the story of the Nephilim became not just a biblical puzzle, but a universal mystery. The mystery of the Nephilim does not exist in isolation. Across the ancient world, stories of beings who were more than human, often born of unions between gods and mortals, appear in strikingly similar forms. Though the names and settings change, the pattern is familiar. Divine figures stepping across the boundary into the human realm, offspring who are powerful and extraordinary, and a world altered by their presence. These echoes suggest that the story of the Nephilim may belong to a broader human memory, one that stretches across cultures and continents. In Greek mythology, The Titans and their descendants stand as towering figures who once challenged the gods themselves. They were said to be of immense strength, beings of primal power who shaped the earth through their battles. Later came the demigods, children of gods and human women, figures like Hercules, whose strength and fame made them larger than life. These tales carry a remarkable resemblance to the biblical description of mighty men of old, men of renown, language that closely parallels the Greek vision of heroic but dangerous hybrids. In Mesopotamian tradition, stories of Apkallu, wise beings who brought knowledge from the gods to humanity, mirror the role of the Watchers. Some depictions describe them as part human and part divine, creatures who were revered for their wisdom, but whose teachings sometimes led humanity astray. The flood narrative in Mesopotamian epics also ties closely with the biblical story, suggesting that the corruption of divine-human interaction was remembered across cultures. Further east in Indian mythology, tales of Asuras and Devas intertwine with human history, portraying battles between divine beings and mortals, where hybrid offspring and extraordinary warriors emerged. The Ramayana and Mahabharata are filled with accounts of beings who exceed human limits, blurring the line between the mortal and the divine. These stories resonate with the idea of the Nephilim, showing how the memory of such figures appears in many corners of the ancient world. Even among Native American traditions, legends speak of giants who once walked the land, some benevolent, others destructive. Tribes across North America tell stories of towering beings whose presence shaped the land and whose memory lingered long after their disappearance. While these tales vary in detail, they reveal a shared human impulse to explain encounters with something greater, something beyond ordinary human experience. What is striking is not only the similarity of these accounts, but their recurring themes: forbidden unions, extraordinary offspring, giants or mighty warriors, and the disruption of divine order. Whether these stories arose from shared historical events, from common archetypes within the human imagination, or from spiritual realities experienced across cultures, they point to something deeply ingrained in humanity's collective memory. The echoes of the Nephilim in global myth remind us that ancient peoples did not see the world as a closed system. The boundary between heaven and earth was porous, and stories of beings who crossed that boundary were taken seriously. The Nephilim fit into this larger pattern, a reminder that the biblical account, though unique in its message, exists within a wider tapestry of human tradition. For Israel, the memory of giants and mighty ones was not just myth, but lived experience. As the people journeyed toward the land promised to them, they encountered accounts of great figures who seemed impossible to overcome. These stories of giants were not confined to distant legends, but became part of Israel's own history, shaping the fears and faith of a people on the edge of destiny. When the spies returned from Canaan with their report, they spoke not only of fertile land and abundant fruit, but also of inhabitants so large and powerful that they felt as though they were insects in comparison. Their words carried an echo of the Nephilim, linking the present with an ancient past that still haunted their imagination. Whether they encountered literal giants or whether their fear exaggerated the stature of their enemies, the impact on Israel was the same: the presence of overwhelming opposition. The descendants of Enoch, often associated with the Nephilim, became symbols of the impossible challenge. Facing such beings was not simply about confronting flesh and blood, but about confronting the fear of defeat and the sense of human smallness before forces that seemed unconquerable. The Israelites' hesitation to enter the land was shaped by this vision of giants, turning what should have been a journey of faith into a moment of rebellion and despair. Throughout Israel's history, giants continued to appear as adversaries. Goliath, the Philistine champion who challenged David, is perhaps the most famous example. Though not explicitly called a Nephilim, his extraordinary size and strength carried the same aura. His defeat by a shepherd boy with a sling became a defining moment, not only for Israel, but for the theme of divine power overcoming human weakness. The story reinforced that no matter how formidable the enemy, victory belonged to God. These encounters suggest that giants were remembered not merely as physical beings, but as embodiments of fear and resistance. They stood in the way of promise, blocking the path to blessing and fulfillment. Whether literal in form or symbolic in meaning, the giants represented the obstacles that test faith, the challenges that cannot be overcome by human strength alone. The Israelites' struggle with the memory of the Nephilim reflects a deeper struggle of humanity as a whole. Every generation faces giants of its own, forces that seem overwhelming, battles that appear unwinnable. The Nephilim, in this sense, are not only ancient adversaries, but ongoing symbols of the challenges that shape the human journey. The persistence of their presence in Israel's history raises another question. Why would God allow such beings to exist? If the Nephilim were part of the corruption that led to the flood, why do they appear again afterward? And what do they reveal about the relationship between human freedom, divine judgment, and the unfolding plan of redemption? These questions open the door to theological reflection. The Nephilim are not just figures of history or myth. They are part of the larger story of creation, rebellion, and restoration. Their existence forces us to grapple with mysteries about God's justice and mercy, about the limits of human understanding, and about the purpose of boundaries set between heaven and earth. The story of Israel and the giants leads naturally into these deeper questions, for behind the accounts of mighty warriors and towering figures lies a greater concern: what the Nephilim reveal about humanity's relationship with God, about the nature of evil, and about the unfolding drama of divine judgment and mercy. The existence of the Nephilim raises profound questions that reach far beyond the curiosity of history. At the heart of their story lies a tension between divine order and human rebellion, between boundaries set by God and the willful crossing of those boundaries by both heavenly and earthly beings. This tension reflects some of the most fundamental struggles in theology: the nature of free will, the consequences of disobedience, and the justice of divine judgment. One question often asked is why God allowed such beings to come into existence at all. If the Nephilim were the offspring of forbidden unions, why permit such unions to take place? The answer may lie in the mystery of freedom. Both angels and humans were created with the ability to choose, and with that freedom came the possibility of rebellion. The Nephilim stand as a testament to what happens when freedom is misused, when desire overrules obedience, and when the created order is distorted. Their presence also forces us to consider the nature of corruption. The Genesis account places the rise of the Nephilim just before God declares that the wickedness of humanity had become unbearable. This timing suggests that the Nephilim were not an isolated anomaly, but part of a larger wave of corruption that spread across the earth. They embodied the blurring of boundaries, the rejection of God's design, and the elevation of power and violence over righteousness and faithfulness. The flood, then, becomes more than a story of natural disaster. It becomes an act of cleansing, a divine response to a creation that had been twisted beyond recognition. If the Nephilim represented the peak of that corruption, their destruction symbolized the attempt to restore order, to re-establish boundaries, and to renew creation. The flood was not simply about punishment, but about the preservation of humanity's future. At the same time, the Nephilim remind us of the seriousness of divine judgment. Their story is sobering, for it shows that God does not ignore rebellion or allow corruption to spread unchecked. The boundaries of creation exist for a reason, and when they are transgressed, consequences follow. The Nephilim embody those consequences, serving as a living warning of what happens when creation resists its creator. Yet even in this, the story points to mercy. The flood did not erase humanity, but preserved a remnant, a chance for new beginnings. The existence of the Nephilim highlights the gravity of sin, but the preservation of Noah highlights the enduring faithfulness of God. Together, they reveal a God who judges corruption, but who also offers renewal and hope. The theological questions raised by the Nephilim ripple into later scripture as well. They touch on themes of spiritual warfare, the struggle between good and evil, and the longing for ultimate restoration. Though the New Testament does not mention the Nephilim directly, its discussions of angels, demons, and the battle against spiritual forces echo the questions first raised in Genesis. It is to these echoes in later scripture that we now turn. For while the name of the Nephilim disappears from the text, their shadow lingers, shaping the way believers understood angels, fallen beings, and the ongoing struggle that plays out not only in history, but in the unseen realm. When we step into the New Testament, the name Nephilim is no longer present, yet the themes tied to them continue to surface in new and powerful ways. The early Christian writings carry forward the concern with fallen angels, spiritual corruption, and the unseen battle that shapes human destiny. Though not always explicit, the legacy of the Nephilim can be felt in the way these texts describe the forces of darkness and the vigilance required to stand against them. The letters of Peter and Jude both reference angels who sinned, who abandoned their proper dwelling, and who were cast into chains of darkness until the day of judgment. These descriptions strongly resemble the tradition of the Watchers found in the Book of Enoch, linking the New Testament writers to the same stories that surrounded the Nephilim in Jewish thought. For early Christians, the rebellion of angels was not a distant myth, but a present reality with ongoing consequences. In passages that speak of spiritual warfare, such as Paul's reminder that believers wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, authorities, and powers of darkness, one hears the echo of Genesis 6. The struggle is not merely human, but cosmic, not merely physical, but spiritual. Though the Nephilim are not named, the sense of a corrupted union, of beings who overstep boundaries and bring ruin, is woven into the fabric of these warnings. Later, Christian interpretation often connected the Nephilim with the growing expectation of apocalyptic events. The idea that hybrids of heaven and earth had once walked among humanity fed into speculations about what might happen at the end of days. Some imagined a return of such beings, others saw them as precursors of the Antichrist, figures whose power and rebellion would once again shake the world. The fascination with the Nephilim did not disappear after the early church. Throughout the Middle Ages, scholars debated their nature, artists imagined their appearance, and preachers warned of their legacy. The blending of biblical text with apocryphal writings and folklore kept the mystery alive, ensuring that the Nephilim remained a subject of wonder and fear. In more recent times, the Nephilim have found a place in popular imagination, appearing in literature, film, and theories that connect them with everything from ancient monuments to extraterrestrial visitors. While not grounded in scripture, these interpretations reveal the enduring power of the Nephilim as symbols of what lies beyond ordinary human experience. They represent the unknown, the dangerous, and the possibility that the world is far stranger than it appears. The New Testament may not dwell on the Nephilim by name, but its themes of vigilance, spiritual struggle, and the consequences of rebellion keep their memory alive in another form. The Nephilim serve as a backdrop to the larger narrative of redemption, a reminder of what happens when heaven and earth are torn from their proper order, and a sign of the victory that can only come through divine power. As the story continues, the focus returns to the flood, that great moment of divine judgment when the world was cleansed of its corruption. To understand the Nephilim fully, one must revisit the waters of Noah's day, when God chose to act decisively against the forces that had twisted creation and when the legacy of the Nephilim was drowned beneath the depths of judgment. The flood narrative is one of the most well-known stories in the Bible, yet behind its familiar imagery of rain, ark, and animals lies a deeper context tied to the Nephilim. The timing of their appearance in Genesis, just before God announces his decision to destroy all life on earth, suggests a connection that cannot be overlooked. The Nephilim, with their corrupted origins and violent ways, appear as part of the backdrop to one of the greatest acts of judgment recorded in Scripture. The description in Genesis emphasizes that the wickedness of humanity had become great, and that every thought of the human heart was only evil continually. Violence filled the earth, and the presence of the Nephilim seems to embody that corruption. Whether they were giants in stature or mighty warriors in reputation, their legacy was one of destruction, an amplification of human rebellion through the crossing of divine boundaries. For generations, interpreters have seen the flood as a reset, a way of cleansing creation from the defilement introduced by the Nephilim and by human sin. Just as the boundaries of heaven and earth had been broken through forbidden unions, the flood re-established those boundaries with overwhelming force. Water, the symbol of chaos, became the instrument of renewal, washing away the corruption so that life could begin again through Noah and his family. The destruction of the Nephilim in the flood also carries a symbolic weight. They represented the pinnacle of rebellion, the embodiment of defiance against divine order. Their removal by the waters of judgment demonstrates that no matter how mighty or renowned these beings appeared, they could not withstand the justice of God. The very flood that wiped away the giants preserved humanity's future by ensuring that creation would not be entirely consumed by corruption. At the same time, the flood story does not paint judgment as an act of blind wrath. It presents a God grieved by the state of creation, a creator who saw the beauty of what had been made disfigured by rebellion. The flood is an act of sorrow as much as justice, a recognition that corruption had spread so deeply that renewal could only come through cleansing. The Nephilim, as part of that corruption, was swept away in the waters of grief and judgment. Yet even after such an overwhelming event, questions remain. The Book of Numbers suggests that the Nephilim, or at least their descendants, appeared again after the flood. How could this be if the flood was meant to destroy them? Did their bloodline somehow survive through Noah's family? Or did new unions occur, repeating the same corruption in the generations that followed? These questions remind us that the flood was not the end of the struggle, but only one chapter in a much larger story. The battle between divine order and rebellion did not vanish with the waters, but continued to shape history. The Nephilim, or the memory of them, returned to trouble Israel and to haunt the imagination of later generations. The flood provides a dramatic turning point, but it also leaves us with lingering questions about survival, memory, and the persistence of corruption. To explore these mysteries, we must turn to the accounts of the Nephilim after the flood. Those shadowy references that suggest their presence did not disappear with the waters, but endured in ways both troubling and profound. The appearance of the Nephilim in Numbers 13 is one of the most puzzling details in the biblical narrative. If the flood destroyed them, how could the spies report seeing them again in Canaan? This tension has led to centuries of speculation about the survival of the Nephilim, whether through hidden bloodlines, renewed unions, or a legacy of memory that outlasted the floodwaters. One possibility is that the Nephilim bloodline survived through the family of Noah. While Noah himself is described as righteous and blameless in his generation, the same is not said of his sons or their wives. Some interpreters suggest that a trace of the Nephilim may have entered through marriage, allowing their descendants to re-emerge in later generations. This theory attempts to reconcile the flood's destruction with the later mention of giants in the land. Another perspective holds that the Nephilim were not carried through the flood, but reappeared through new unions after it. If the sons of God in Genesis 6 were angelic beings who crossed into the human realm, it is possible that such interactions occurred again, producing another generation of hybrids. This would explain the reports of giants in Canaan without requiring the survival of any pre-flood lineage. A third possibility is that the Nephilim of Numbers 13 were not literally the same beings, but were identified with them by association. The Anakim, the descendants of Anak, were described as giants, and the spies may have used the term Nephilim to connect them with the legendary figures of old. In this view, the Nephilim became a symbolic label for any group of formidable enemies, regardless of their origin. Whichever interpretation one chooses, the reappearance of the Nephilim highlights the persistence of fear in the human heart. For the Israelites, the giants in the land represented more than physical opponents. They embodied the sense of facing an impossible challenge, an enemy too great to overcome. Whether the Nephilim were literal survivors, new hybrids, or symbolic exaggerations, their presence carried the same effect: the temptation to despair and to doubt the promises of God. The survival of the Nephilim, in whatever form, also raises questions about the ongoing influence of corruption. If the flood was meant to cleanse the earth, the reappearance of giants suggests that corruption is never so easily erased. Sin and rebellion are not confined to a single moment, but resurface again and again, requiring constant vigilance and faith. In this sense, the Nephilim after the flood become a reminder that the struggle against corruption did not end with Noah, but continued throughout Israel's journey and continues even now. They stand as symbols of recurring opposition, the forces that rise again whenever humanity draws near to its inheritance. The question of their survival leads naturally into another aspect of their identity: the connection between the Nephilim and the mighty men of old, figures whose power and reputation shaped history. Were these mighty men themselves part of the Nephilim legacy, or were they inspired by it? To answer this, we turn to the enigmatic mention of the heroes of ancient times, whose presence looms large in the biblical imagination. In Genesis 6, alongside the mention of the Nephilim, the text refers to the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. This phrase carries an air of legend, suggesting figures whose strength, power, or influence set them apart from ordinary humanity. The question is whether these mighty men were themselves the Nephilim, or whether they were a related but distinct group whose memory became entwined with the story of giants and fallen ones. Some traditions interpret the mighty men as direct offspring of the unions between the sons of God and the daughters of men. If this is the case, then the Nephilim and the mighty men are essentially the same, their fame arising from their unnatural origins and their extraordinary abilities. They would have been remembered as heroes of great power, but also as figures who contributed to the corruption of the world. Others see the mighty men as human figures influenced by the Nephilim, but not identical to them. In this view, the Nephilim may have inspired stories of legendary warriors and kings whose reputations grew over time until they were remembered as more than human. This interpretation allows for the possibility that the Nephilim were real beings, but that their influence extended far beyond their immediate presence, shaping myths and histories across generations. The figure of Nimrod, described in Genesis as a mighty hunter before the Lord, has often been connected with this theme. Though not explicitly linked to the Nephilim, his portrayal as a powerful ruler who founded great cities has led some to wonder if he was part of the same tradition of mighty men. Nimrod's association with empire and rebellion suggests that the legacy of the Nephilim may not have been limited to physical stature, but extended into the rise of kingdoms and systems opposed to God's rule. Kings and warriors throughout history have been remembered as larger than life, their deeds magnified by memory and legend. In the ancient world, where oral storytelling carried the past from generation to generation, it is easy to see how the mighty men of old became figures of renown, embodying both the admiration and the fear of those who remembered them. Whether they were literal giants or symbolic heroes, they occupied a place where myth and history blended into one. The rise of mighty men also connects to the human desire for power and greatness. The Nephilim, whether real or remembered, represented a kind of strength that fascinated and terrified. Their stories may have inspired later rulers to imitate their reputation, seeking to establish themselves as mighty men in their own right. In this way, the Nephilim legacy could have influenced not only myth, but the ambitions of empires and kings. These figures remind us that the line between hero and tyrant is often thin. A man of renown could be admired for his achievements, but feared for his cruelty. The mighty men of old may have been celebrated, but their fame was tied to the corruption that led to the flood, suggesting that greatness without righteousness leads to destruction. The mention of mighty men invites reflection on the deeper meaning of strength and power. It asks whether true greatness is found in renown or in faithfulness, in conquest or in obedience. The Nephilim and their legacy serve as a warning that power unmoored from divine order becomes destructive, no matter how impressive it may appear. From here, the story of the Nephilim broadens once more into the realm of the unseen, connecting not only to human history, but to the ongoing battle between good and evil. The mighty men and the giants they represent become part of a larger theme of spiritual conflict, reminding us that the struggle is not only with flesh and blood, but with the forces that seek to corrupt and destroy. The story of the Nephilim is not confined to questions of history or legend. It reaches into the realm of the spiritual, where battles are fought beyond what human eyes can see. The Nephilim embody a union of the physical and the spiritual, and their presence in Scripture invites us to consider the broader struggle between good and evil, between divine order and rebellion. In Ephesians, Paul speaks of a battle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and rulers of darkness in heavenly places. This description mirrors the ancient traditions that connected the Nephilim with the rebellion of the Watchers, suggesting that humanity's struggle is not only against human enemies, but against corrupted spiritual beings whose influence spills into the world. The Nephilim, as offspring of such unions, become living symbols of this struggle, visible reminders of an invisible conflict. Throughout Israel's encounters with giants, the challenge was never merely about size or strength. It was about faith, about trusting in God's power when human strength faltered. David's victory over Goliath is a vivid example. The battle was not won with sword or spear, but with faith in the living God. In this sense, every confrontation with giants reflected a deeper confrontation with the forces of darkness, a test of whether fear or faith would prevail. The Nephilim can also be seen as embodiments of temptation. They represent the allure of forbidden knowledge, the desire for power, and the crossing of boundaries that should remain intact. Humanity has always faced such temptations, and the story of the Nephilim reminds us that spiritual warfare often begins not with armies on a battlefield, but with choices in the heart, choices about obedience, purity, and the pursuit of truth. Some traditions hold that the spirits of the Nephilim, left behind after their destruction, became the demons that plague humanity. If this view is correct, then their role in spiritual warfare continues even now, not as giants of flesh and bone, but as unseen forces that seek to influence, deceive, and destroy. This interpretation ties the ancient past directly to the present, suggesting that the battle that began in the days before the flood still rages in the unseen realm. The Nephilim remind us that spiritual warfare is not an abstract idea but a lived reality. Just as Israel faced giants in Canaan, each generation faces challenges that seem impossible to overcome, challenges that test faith, resilience, and trust in God's power. The giants of today may not stand with sword and spear, but they appear in the form of ideologies, temptations, and struggles that demand courage and spiritual strength. Understanding the Nephilim in the context of spiritual warfare helps bridge the gap between ancient mystery and present reality. They are more than relics of a distant past. They are part of an ongoing story of conflict and redemption. And this connection between the ancient and the modern has inspired many to wonder whether the Nephilim also played a role in shaping the great works of the past, the monuments and mysteries that still stand as silent witnesses to forgotten ages. Across the world, colossal structures rise from the earth, silent and enduring, their builders often unknown. The pyramids of Egypt, the megaliths of Stonehenge, the massive stones of Baalbek, and the giant statues of Easter Island all stand as testaments to human ingenuity, or perhaps, according to some, to something more. Could the Nephilim, with their strength and knowledge, have played a role in shaping these ancient wonders? The theory that giants were behind ancient architecture has captivated many, who see in these monuments evidence of abilities beyond ordinary human capacity. Some stones, weighing hundreds of tons, appear too large to have been moved with the technology available at the time. Legends in various cultures speak of giants or divine beings constructing great works, suggesting that the memory of the Nephilim may be embedded in these traditions. The Book of Enoch describes the Watchers as imparting forbidden knowledge, teaching humanity skills in metallurgy, astronomy, and sorcery. If such knowledge was passed on to their offspring or to early civilizations, it could explain the sudden rise of advanced construction techniques in places far apart, yet strikingly similar in design. From Mesopotamian ziggurats to Mesoamerican pyramids, the echoes of this knowledge appear to ripple across history. In many cultures, stories of giants are directly tied to specific landmarks. Native Hawaiian tradition speaks of giants who built sacred structures, while in South America, legends tell of beings of enormous size who shaped the land and raised massive stones. These stories, passed down through generations, may preserve memories of encounters with beings like the Nephilim, woven into myth but rooted in some remembered reality. Skeptics argue that these theories underestimate the ingenuity of ancient peoples, who developed sophisticated methods of engineering and construction. Indeed, humanity has always been resourceful, and the ability to build great works does not require the intervention of giants. Yet the persistence of giant-building legends suggests that people across the world felt compelled to explain the origins of such feats in ways that surpassed human limits. The fascination with giants and architecture speaks to a deeper question about the legacy of the Nephilim. Were they remembered not only for their strength and violence, but also for leaving a lasting mark on the physical world? If so, the monuments that still stand may not only be artifacts of human civilization, but also silent reminders of an ancient era when boundaries between heaven and earth were crossed. These theories may never be proven, yet they keep alive the sense of mystery that surrounds the Nephilim. The connection between giants and monumental architecture opens the imagination to the possibility that traces of their presence remain etched into the earth. And it is this sense of persistence, of unfinished echoes, that leads some to wonder whether the Nephilim might not only be part of the past, but also part of the future. Among those who study prophecy and apocalyptic visions, the question of the Nephilim's return looms large. If such beings once existed, could they appear again as part of the events leading to the end of days? The Bible speaks of a time when the world will be filled with deception, corruption, and rebellion against God, themes that resonate strongly with the story of the Nephilim. Some interpreters point to Jesus' words that the last days will be as the days of Noah. This statement has fueled speculation that the conditions of Noah's time, including the presence of the Nephilim, might return in some form. If the days before the flood were marked by angelic rebellion, forbidden unions, and hybrid beings, then the end times could see a resurgence of similar corruption. Others connect the Nephilim with visions of demonic forces in Revelation, where creatures that are part human and part beast emerge to torment the earth. These apocalyptic images recall the hybrid nature of the Nephilim, suggesting that the boundaries between heaven, earth, and the underworld will once again be crossed in terrifying ways. The rise of modern interest in genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and transhumanism has also fueled speculation that humanity itself may be on the verge of creating its own Nephilim-like beings. Just as the Nephilim represented the blending of two realms, these technologies raise questions about what it means to be human and whether crossing certain boundaries may lead to consequences beyond our control. For many, the possibility of the Nephilim's return is not about literal giants, but about the reappearance of the same spirit of rebellion. The end times may not bring back the exact beings of Genesis, but they may unleash forces that carry the same essence: the desire to transcend limits, the corruption of creation, and the exaltation of power over obedience. Prophecy warns of deception so great that even the faithful will struggle to discern the truth. The Nephilim, with their mysterious origins and extraordinary presence, fit well within this theme of deception. They remind us that not all power is good, not all greatness is righteous, and not all wonders come from God. The Nephilim story, from Genesis to prophecy, speaks of cycles of corruption and judgment, of boundaries broken and restored. Whether they return in physical form or in the spirit of rebellion that defines the last days, their legacy continues to shape the way people imagine the future. The Nephilim are not merely a relic of the past, they are part of the prophetic imagination that looks toward the culmination of history. As these questions of prophecy unfold, one final matter remains. What were the Nephilim truly? Were they giants, fallen ones, or something else entirely? The debate continues, not to close the story, but to invite reflection on the mystery that still lingers in their name. The Nephilim have lingered in human imagination for millennia, not because their story is long, but because it is mysterious. Their brief appearances in scripture, their echoes in tradition, and their shadows in myth have given rise to countless interpretations. Each perspective, whether literal or symbolic, reveals something about humanity's longing to understand the strange and the extraordinary. Some see them as literal giants, physical beings whose sheer size and strength left an imprint on ancient memory. In this view, the Nephilim were flesh and blood creatures who once walked the earth, towering over humanity and shaping the course of history. Their presence explains the reports of giants in Canaan, the legends of massive warriors, and the enduring fascination with colossal figures in myth and folklore. Others regard them as hybrids, the offspring of heavenly beings and human women, a crossing of boundaries that defied the order of creation. This interpretation sees the Nephilim not simply as tall men, but as cosmic anomalies, embodiments of rebellion that brought corruption into the human world. Their destruction in the flood and their association with fallen angels underscore the seriousness of their existence and the danger they pose to humanity. Still, others view them through a symbolic lens, as representations of human pride, tyranny, and corruption. In this reading, the Nephilim are not so much supernatural beings as exaggerated figures of power, kings and warriors remembered as larger than life. Their story serves as a warning about the dangers of unchecked ambition, the violence of empires, and the temptation to seek greatness apart from God. Perhaps the truth of the Nephilim lies not in choosing one interpretation over another, but in recognizing how all these perspectives illuminate different facets of the mystery. They may have been giants in body, giants in reputation, and giants in corruption all at once. The ambiguity of the text leaves room for wonder, inviting every generation to reflect on what the Nephilim reveal about humanity, creation, and the struggle between good and evil. The enduring power of the Nephilim is not just in what they were, but in what they represent. They embody the crossing of boundaries that should not be crossed, the allure of forbidden knowledge, and the temptation to exalt power over righteousness. Whether seen as giants, fallen ones, or something else, they remind us that the human story is never separate from the spiritual story, and that what happens in the unseen realm shapes what happens in the world we know. The Nephilim are a mystery without a final answer, and perhaps that is why their story endures. They leave us with questions rather than conclusions, with shadows rather than clarity. Yet in those questions lies the invitation to seek deeper truth, to explore not only the past, but the ongoing drama of creation, rebellion, and redemption. And so the Nephilim remain with us, not just as figures of ancient times, but as symbols of the mysteries that still surround us, mysteries that invite us to keep searching, keep questioning, and keep looking beyond what is seen to what is eternal. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the mystery of the Nephilim. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss new explorations into the hidden depths of scripture and ancient history. Don't forget to like this video if it inspired you, leave a comment to share your thoughts or questions, and pass this video along to friends and family who would also be fascinated by these timeless mysteries. Your support helps this community grow and allows us to continue uncovering the stories that still shape our world today.